Well, joining us right now is Dan Arnold. He was the data and research guru of the last 3 Liberal federal campaigns, was also a past director of research for the Prime Minister's office. Dan, thank you for joining us today.
Happy to be here, yeah.
So you're the numbers guy. You know, there's the numbers guy and then the numbers guy.
Title, yeah.
Exactly. So listen, I wonder how you are feeling then right now, because going into this convention, Abacus, separate firm than the one you're working with right now, they came out with numbers which basically said that the Liberals are in a virtual tie with Conservatives, and you put that into comparison with other polling numbers from different firms, and they actually have this party trailing Conservatives. So as the Liberals consider an argument to the Canadian people to give them a 4th term, is that daunting? Do you think that's surmountable?
Yeah, I mean, my view is that, and this is going to sound weird from a pollster, I would not pay too much attention to the polls between elections, because look, Canadians, I'm at this convention here and I'm absorbing everything that happens in politics, but regular people have other things in their lives. They're not thinking about who I'm going to vote for. Half of Canadians probably don't even know who Pierre Poilievre is, to be honest, at this point in the game. So I think between elections, you know, there's kind of this resting level where the 2 parties are close and, you know, it's in the background. But I think, you know, at this point in the game, I wouldn't too worry about those numbers too much.
Well, except one number that I suspect would be worrying are the disapproval numbers for the Prime Minister, because to my understanding, they are towards an all-time high for him, where 40% of Canadians are expressing dissatisfaction with his leadership. And for someone who's trying to go for a 4th term, that kind of likability and trust factor has to matter.
Yeah, I think it's fair to say, you know, governments that are in power for a long time, you start to get a few nicks and bruises along the way. There's a natural time for change sentiment that impacts any government that's around this long. And look, the economy hasn't been great the last year as well too, right? With inflation, people are feeling a lot of pressure. I think it's natural that you'd expect some frustration to kind of bubble over a little bit there towards the government. I guess the question is, you know, the next election, I don't think it's going to be anytime soon. I hope not. I'm tired of elections. But, you know, in 2 years from now, it could be a completely different situation, right? And I think the Prime Minister has shown that on the campaign trail, he can bring the energy, he can bring the fire, he can excite people, he can come up in a debate. We see this weekend that he's still got a lot of drive in his tank. So I think in a campaign situation too, if he brings his A game, he's got the opportunity to kind of remind people what they like about him as well too.
Okay, so from a numbers perspective, when you ask people and look at their responses, where does the Prime Minister score high?
Yeah, so I find the thing that kills governments, I think, is when they're seen as being out of touch. One question I like asking is, like, how much attention does the government pay to people like you when they're making policy decisions? And by the end of the Stephen Harper years, you know, he started about close to 50% of people said they pay some attention to me. By the end of his time, he was down to about 30%. He was seen as out of touch, and it's very hard for anyone to get reelected in that situation. At this point in the game, I haven't seen anything like that around this government. People still think they're thinking about people like them. There's certainly problems. There's things they don't like about the government, but they do feel the government is still kind of connected to them, still cares about them, and that same thing with the Prime Minister. He's seen as somebody who cares, who kind of understands what people are going through, and I think if he can keep that, he's in good shape. I think the risk, though, is that if there's inflation and people aren't doing well day to day, if they start to feel like he's disconnected, he doesn't know what I'm going through, that's where it starts to get really dangerous for an incumbent.
Okay, so again, you essentially were the numbers guru for the last 3 campaigns. I'm wondering, when you look at the 2021 campaign, are there any lessons that you think this party needs to learn out of that vote?
Yeah, I think there's lessons that come out of every vote. I think every campaign's a little bit different, and, you know, the way to run against Erin O'Toole, very different than the way to run against Andrew Scheer, and Pierre Poilievre, as we know, is a completely different opposition. So, you know, I think what that actual narrative is, what that contrast is, that could change. I think the lessons that I would learn from the last campaign are more in terms of tactics. You know, the party knocked on Liberal volunteers knocked on $15 million during that election campaign, and as a result of that, you look at the 24 closest ridings, Liberals won 19 of them. I think a lot of that was because there was a good organization, a good ground game, and that's part of what this convention's about. It's trying to get volunteers energized so they go out there and they knock on doors and raise money. And I think if the party has that type of organization, that can help them get that little extra nudge to kind of get them over the line in, you know, close ridings next election campaign.
Okay, which makes me wonder about how you build the vote because, of course, the Liberals, your party, won the last two elections with a minority government, but the popular vote still went to the Conservatives in the last two elections. How do you build your vote? Do you see regions, demographics that this party might be able to reach to?
Yeah, and one thing I talked about actually to some of the delegates here yesterday is that the Liberal support has gone down among younger Canadians subsequently. 2015, young people came out, they were very excited, they voted Liberal, a bit less in 2019, even less than that in 2021. And a lot of them just aren't voting, a lot of them are voting for the NDP. I think it's really important for the Liberal Party to try to find a way to get young people excited. And it's tough when you're the government, you're the man. If you want radical change as a voter, it's hard to kind of sell that when you're in government. But I think it's important to find a way to connect with young people, show that the things the government's doing around housing and environment are actually getting results, making people's lives better. And if they can, I think, do a good job connecting with some of those young voters they may have lost, that's definitely a growth potential area I see for us in the next campaign. Regionally, I think there's urban Western Canada, there's rural Quebec, there's some seats that kind of got flipped last campaign that could be won back. So I think you could easily cobble together the extra seats needed to get up to a majority. But I think, demographically, I do think young people and getting them back is probably the most fertile ground right now.
Well, always fascinating to look at the numbers and how you analyze that. Dan, thank you so much for the time today.
Yeah, anytime.